We'll go ahead and get started. I just want to introduce myself. I am Melissa Kaiser. I'm head of compliance for SOCSoter, and your host today. So what we plan on doing is talking about the proposed rule that got dropped the day after Christmas. Okay, just a few admin notes. You will have questions. We get it. Please save them at the end for questions and answers. And all attendees will get slides and recording of this webinar as well. Okay, just a little bit about me. That's me, my background, and I'm going to take you guys through the proposed rule. We also have David Nathans on the call. He is going to talk a little bit of SOCSoter's architecture and infrastructure and how it is designed to protect our customers. And then we have Don Crabill. He is our manager, program manager in sales, and he'll lead business manager. That's his official title, sorry. And he'll be talking about our services.
Hello, everyone.
All right, here's our agenda. So it's been a while since we last talked about CMMC. I think it was in the summer of last year, and that's right when the proposed rule was going up to OMB. So I kind of want to recap what I talked about, some key takeaways from that, and to level set everybody of where we're at today, then talk about the timeline and the proposed rule. It had some shocking information on it, and I just want to let you know what that is and what it means to you and to your business. Then I'm going to talk, David Nathans is going to talk about SOCSoter's architect and kind of peek underneath the covers of what we're doing to protect your information. And then Don will go ahead and talk about our services. All right. To recap, I've been saying it for a long time. CMMC is 25% technology and 75% documentation. The technology is easy to implement compared to the documentation, and documentation always goes with a culture change because the way you have been doing it is no longer satisfactory. You have to really change how people operate, what people do, maintain timelines, intervals, and make sure that your processes and procedures match out for what you actually do, and the people who are supposed to implement them know what they're supposed to do and when, and understand the process. It's very difficult. So these were the key takeaways from last time. There's some of them are still valid, some of them are not. So if you have templates that you found off the internet, I would be suspect about using them because CMMC is very complicated. And if you don't understand the controls and the purpose of the controls and understand what the words mean as far as what an auditor requires, I would avoid using templates. I would work with a consultant to help write those templates for you. A common complaint I hear across the supply chain is that the DoD and your customers are doing a horrible job at annotating CUI correctly. In the proposed rule, it talks about that, and that was a common complaint, and the DoD addressed it. And they said, just because you don't have CUI marked or you get it from your customers that is marked correctly does not mean that you get to ignore it either. What they want you to do, they want you to review the NARA requirements, because NARA is the one who defines CUI. And then you can determine what is CUI. Typically, with most of our customers, it's going to be engineer drawings, schematic, something that you're doing for the DoD. That's typically going to be CUI. All right. Most people have been following NIST 800-171 Rev 2, and Rev 2 does not address any cloud providers. So the DFARS clause 252.204-7012, which is in most of your contracts, say that you need to be any CUI hosted in a cloud environment must be in a FedRAMP moderate environment. So that means Microsoft 365, if you use the commercial version, chances are that's not going to be good enough. You have to be in GCC or GCC high, and FedRAMP moderate or FedRAMP moderate high. FedRAMP moderate high means that you have to comply with ITAR's requirements, which is a State Department requirement, not a DoD requirement. So you have to pay attention to that. If you have CUI in a cloud ERP system, that needs to be in a FedRAMP moderate environment. Nowhere in NIST 800-171 Rev 2 says anything about the FedRAMP moderate environment requirement. You have to read the DFARS clause. One other thing that was getting kicked around was about NIST 800-171 Rev 3 was getting to be released. It is released. I personally like Rev 3 better than Rev 2. And so it was a lot of confusion. It's like, well, Rev 3 gets released. Do we need to follow the compliance to Rev 3 or Rev 2? The proposed rule says no, we're sticking to Rev 2, which is great because Rev 3 is about 30% more requirements. So that's a good thing for us. Okay, voluntary assessments are happening. So SOCSoter went through a voluntary assessment with one of our end customers, and we did very well. It's happening. So if you're ready or you're close to being ready, I highly recommend you volunteering for this because things are about to change really quick. I also estimated that we're going to start seeing certification requirements, which is DFARS clause 252.204-7021 to start appearing in RFPs. That is not, I'm going to talk about the timeline. We're looking more to 2025 or so, maybe later. It all depends. Estimated time to prepare is 1 year plus. I talked about earlier about a culture change. That's really what you're looking to change. Implementing the technology isn't going to be that hard, but implementing the change of you and your employees that have to go through and your MSP, that's what really takes a long time to do because everybody has to be on the same sheet of music. When the auditor comes in, they're going to look for screenshots, screen shares, interview people, and look at your policy. And all three of them have to line up. So if you made some kind of architectural change to your environment, everything has to change and everybody has to know what changed and why and when, and that all has to be documented. And that's really, one of the challenges with CMMC is that documentation portion. The DoD says that there are 221 DIB contractors out there. I think that's very low because the DoD can only see the primes and then only can say maybe tier 1 supply chain. But if you're building an F-35, the supply chain might be, 15 to 20 levels deep, and the DoD doesn't see that. So that's low, I think. And they're estimating too that of those 221 DIB contractors, 72,000 need that level 2 assessment. So it just means that, CMMC consultants' dance cards are filling up quick. So find somebody who find somebody who can trust, talk to them, see if you're on the right track. If you want to do it by yourself, terrific. If you need a little bit of help, reach out because there's just not a lot of people out there yet since this is so new. All right, let's get into the proposed rule timeline. So, like I said earlier, the DoD published the proposed rule on December 26th. Merry Christmas to us. It really wasn't a good Christmas present. And they're accepting public comments until February 26, 2023. At the end of this webinar, I do have links to some of these, so you can take a look at it and read it. The published rule, depending on the format, goes from, I think, 254 pages long. If it's in 3 columns, it's only 81 pages, but it's still a lot. It's a lot.
Is public comments until February 26th of 2024?
24. I'm sorry. I have the wrong timeline. Yeah, 2024, not 2023, because that's in the past. Thank you. So we have about a month and a half to make comments. The rule, like I said, is very long, and if you read it, if you decide to read it, it talks about it, the public comments from the release back in 2021 that also discuss that, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. So DoD must respond to public comments. That's a requirement. Typically, on average, it takes about 1 year to publish the comments. However, 2024 is an election year, so there might be a change in, the executive branch, change in Congress. So that might make the DoD answer those public questions sooner because they don't want to have to go through a congressional review. So at a publication of a final rule, Congress has an option to review the rule. And they can make comments to it, they can stop it, they can do a lot of different things. But the DoD has the support of this administration, and so if something changes, they want to make sure they continue to have the support because the DoD has invested a lot of time and money into this, and they don't want to get it derailed by Congress. All right, so the final rules should be published December 26, 2024, if they go a little quicker than normal. So let's just keep that. Just 1 year, they published the final rule. So what does the timeline look like? Okay, so they're going to begin seeing the contract clause that you need certification. That is going to be, then we're going to start to see it in maybe February of 2025, maybe March, I don't know. But what they're going to be doing is that they're going to say, okay, some contracts need that assessment. Some contracts need the certification. Some of them might just have self-assessments. And it says no low scores allowed. Low scores is an SPRS score of lower than 80. The best score you can get is 110. And that's what the goal is for the DoD, wants everybody to be at 110. So they might still allow self-assessments. They might not. We don't know what this looks like. Then you have phase 2 rollout, which is going to be maybe August, September 2025. That means majority of the contracts are going to require level 2 certification. That's only 6 months. That is tough. That is tough. Right now, for the people to do the certifications, they're called C3PAOs. You can find them in the Cyber AB marketplace. There's only 50 of them. So there's not many, but that doesn't mean that you need to not prepare. You need to start preparing now because it's coming quickly. And I don't think there's going to be a lot more surprises after this final rule. I think there's just going to be a lot more clarification for us. Okay, then phase 3 is 12 months and phase 4 is another 12 months after that. So August 2027, you're going to have contracts that require level 2 and level 3 assessments. And they believe by 2027, about 7 years after that, every contract is going to have that, because some contracts right now are maybe 5 years, 10 years, and they think they're going to be weaned off of those. But if you do have a 5-year contract and you were awarded that, you're not safe. And, the contract doesn't have that requirement. The DoD can go ahead and say, you know what, I need this contract. This contract now requires certification. So they can go ahead and do that to you. So just be aware of that. Just because you have long-term contracts doesn't mean that you're going to be exempt for 5 years or so from certification. The DoD can go ahead and initiate that at any time that they want. So I just want you guys to be prepared on that. All right, let's talk about the False Claim Acts. So the reason why the DoD is requiring certification, because back on December 31st of 2017, the DoD was allowing self-attestation. And the DoD found that everybody was lying. And this is why we're here today, because all the subcontractors were lying because they're like, oh, this is just another paper drill, doesn't really matter. Yeah, we're good. And from 2017 into now, the security threats have changed and they're more prevalent and it's just harder to fight. So that's why DoD is implementing these changes, is because everybody was lying and the security threats are more frequent. So, False Claims Act. In the proposed rule, the word affirmation is mentioned 248 times. So that means what the affirmation means is that the officer of the company, the organization need assessment, requires an officer to say, yes, I am compliant with level 1. Level 1 only is 15 controls. Level 2, which is the NIST 800-171, 110 controls. And let me expand upon that. Every 3 years, you're supposed to get a CMMC assessment. The other 2 years, you have to affirm that you are still complying with NIST 800-171. The officer of the organization needs to attest to that in where you input the SPRS score. So in FY 2022, the Department of Justice collected $2.2 billion in false claims, fines, and settlements. So it's no joke. And so the officer of the company says that, hey, I'm complying with NIST 800-171. Maybe the COO of that company says, no, we're not. They can go ahead and file suit on behalf of the government of that organization. So, there's a lot of power here. So just to let you know, make sure you're compliant. Don't lie, because it could bite you in the butt. All right. Part of the proposed rule talk about small businesses, because there was a lot of complaints about small businesses, and most of you all are small businesses. So CMMC is expensive, it's time consuming, and the DoD is aware of that. And the DoD also is aware that MSPs and MSSPs play a large role in helping small business with their IT and their security work. And so what we have is in the final rule, the DoD calls MSPs and MSSPs external service providers. And what is that? So here's the definition. So these are all cut and paste from the proposed rule. I didn't want to transcribe this incorrectly. I wanted to have the exact language for you because I think it's important. So an external service provider means external people, technology, or facilities that an organization utilizes for provision, management of comprehensive IT and or cybersecurity service is on behalf of the organization. In the CMMC program, CUI or security protection data, e.g. log data configuration, more about that in a little bit, must be processed, stored, or transmitted. So that's MSP, MSSP, and security vendors, okay? And then it goes on to say an ESP must have a CMMC level 2 final certification assessment. That's tough. That's tough. So the organization needing assessment, the MSP, the MSSP, and the security vendors must have that level 2 certification. And then we talked about that a little bit. So let's go on and talk about security protection assets, because what does that exactly mean? So security protection assets, providing security functions or capabilities to OSAs, which is organization seeking assessment, CMMC assessment scope, regardless if they have CUI. So that part wasn't always there and it wasn't already clear. It's still not clear because we talk about e.g. log data, configuration data. What does security protection assets mean? We need an answer for that. Is that passwords? Is that vulnerability data? Is that antivirus? Is that your asset inventory? I did email the DIBCAC and ask them for a definition, an exhaustive definition of what that means, because that's going to affect you, what security tools and what services you use for your customers. Don't like that EG that's on the list. We kind of need a little bit more than that, but just start thinking about it. Where do you store your passwords? Where is your vulnerability report stored? What about your antivirus, asset inventory? Where is that all stored? I mean, the big thing about it, what I see is your SIM, your RMM, and your PSA. That we know for sure is going to require the level 2 assessment. All right. Yeah, that's tough. Okay. So in some of these definitions, they talked about cloud service provider. I kind of glossed over it, but let me come back to it because this is really important. The cloud service provider's product or service are not FedRAMP authorized. We talked about that, the FedRAMP authorized environment. But they also say not all the security tools can be in a FedRAMP moderate environment. So they have this FedRAMP moderate equivalency and the definition of equivalency. If they don't have that FedRAMP authorization, which you can take a look at on fedramp.gov, which one has that FedRAMP authorization. I have a link at the end to show you about that. But if you don't have that FedRAMP moderate authorization and you're not on the marketplace, then you have to provide a system security plan and a customer responsibility matrix to summarize, blah, blah, blah. That is, I believe, a huge win. I think that makes it really easier because you can hire somebody and just say, hey, you know what, give me an MSP against the FedRAMP requirements. The FedRAMP requirements is pretty significant because it's 300, I think it's 340 controls versus CMMC, which is 110 controls. So it's pretty significant. So get the SSP, get a customer responsibility matrix and show that to the assessor. That sounds pretty easy to me. So that was okay after the fact that we learned that MSPs, MSSPs, and security vendors need to have that certification. So makes it a little bit easier to swallow until last week, January 2nd, DoD defined the FedRAMP moderate equivalency, and it contradicts the CMMC proposed rule. And what I think a lot of the people in the industry that follow this thinks that the proposed rule changed to include this. So I'll have a link at the end of this so you can read it. It's only 3 pages, not 254. It's a little bit easier, but to summarize it, it requires a system security plan. It requires a security assessment plan, a security assessment report performed by a FedRAMP recognized 3PAO. So the difference between a C3PAO is CMMC, a C3PAO is an auditor for FedRAMP, just to let you know what that is, and a plan of action and milestone. So what essentially they're saying is you need to be in a FedRAMP moderate environment. To be in the FedRAMP moderate marketplace, the only way to get in is to have 6 customers in the federal government. So that means DoD, DOE, CIA, DHS, FBI, I guess, who are going to use your products and services. That's the only way. So that kind of limits a lot of smaller companies from being in the space. And so what they're doing, they're opening up the equivalency, but not really, because it's still going to cost a lot to get a FedRAMP 3PAO out there. I think the estimate is close to $1 million. And let's go to costing next.
Can I just make a clarification before you move on?
Yes.
So in order to be a fully FedRAMP authorized infrastructure, as Melissa said, you need to be doing business with at least 6 federal agencies, and you have to go through the JAB audit, which is a federal audit. There are other ways you can get into the marketplace. You can be FedRAMP authorized, which is not a fully granted FedRAMP status. You can be FedRAMP ready, or you can have an agency approval, which means that you've only sold to one agency and you're only allowed to sell to one agency. So for example, if you have a cloud-based medical device, you're only going to be selling to maybe 1 or 2 agencies like the VA or maybe Indian Affairs or maybe even prison services. But that's not going to meet the full requirement for full FedRAMP, but you can still be agency approved. Regardless of the level, you have to go through the 3PAO audit process. And like Melissa said, it's still $1 million effort. It's not insignificant. I've been through it a couple of times, and You might hear, oh, well, it's only going to cost, 250,000. It's not $1 million. The initial audit's probably going to cost you $1.5 million. And then you have to be re-audited every single year on a continuous improvement program, which averages out to be $1 million. So it's going to be pretty unlikely that most vendors are going to want to sign up for that, because the money for that effort comes from the customers paying for the services. And from a small business perspective, the small businesses are not going to want to bear the cost of that effort. The equivalency program that Melissa was talking about before was really for a cloud service offering. So if you're offering infrastructure as a service or platform as a service to your customers, that's really where that comes into play. So if you're an MSP and you have your own NOC, your own cloud, that's where that really comes into play. And for your CMMC specific customers, instead of going through the FedRAMP process and spending that money, which you may find to be a valuable effort if you have that level of business, but maybe those customers get peeled off and put into an environment like AWS, GCP, Google, or Azure, which is already FedRAMP certified, and then host them in that infrastructure. And those infrastructures are already set up for FedRAMP moderate and FedRAMP high.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, this is tough. That's why I said this is a bar fest. This is from Stand By Me. I think if you guys remember the movie back in the 80s. All right. So it's tough. And so what you have to do, you have to evaluate or reevaluate your security stack, because a lot of security vendors do host in the cloud because that's easy. There's not a lot of on-prem solutions out there anymore. And in this MSP marketplace, there's just not. But I don't think this will be hard in the beginning until we straighten it out. It'll be, watching the sausage made. It'll be pretty ugly. But what I recommend for you all to do is start asking your vendors, what are you doing for CMMC? Are you plan on getting certification? Can they talk it intelligently? Do they have a customer responsibility matrix? Do they have a list of what controls that they help satisfy? And the whole FedRAMP moderate too. That's the cost. All right. So
that's really good advice, but I would also take it a little bit deeper and actually look at some of the FedRAMP requirements. For example, authentication seems simple enough, but FedRAMP requires that authentication happens inside U.S. borders. So when you're looking at how something is being authenticated, how you're authenticating into that environment, are you using a tool like Ping? Are you using a tool like Okta? Are you using these OAuth type environments, single sign-on type environments? And is that authentication actually happening in the United States? That is a FedRAMP requirement, and that's the level of detail that you have to get to.
Yes, thank you, Dave, for clarifying that. So costs run downhill. So $1 million for FedRAMP moderate equivalency. We haven't talked about it, but we got that FIPS 140-2 encryption. That is very difficult. And for a company to get that certificate is about, I don't know, $250,000. And then your assessment cost in the proposed rule, they're talking about, there's a whole cost breakdown too, if you want to read it. It's a lot of information. But ultimately, for a small business, what the DoD is estimating, it's going to cost about $30,000 to have that certification from a C3PAO. But that doesn't account for all the prep that you needed to do. If you need to hire additional people, how much is that going to cost? Overall, the DoD is saying something about $104,000 for all that, for the prep and for the certification. So what you guys have to do, you have to make this business decision. Do you want to continue to do this? As an MSP, MSSP, do you want to pay for that? because tools are going to get more expensive. Certification costs money. Recertification costs money. The False Claims Act, how much of your business revolves around the DoD? You have to make that decision as an MSP, as an organization seeking assessment, because it is a business decision. And I am happy to say that SOCSoter is making the business decision to get our assessment. So I'm going to hand it off over to Dave. He's going to talk about the way we architect our solution. He's going to talk about, what we have done and are doing to protect and to be compliant. But it's not all about compliance for us, because compliance doesn't always equal secure and security. So he's going to talk about more about the security portion of this. All right, Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So, thanks for the introduction. What I really want to articulate here in the next coming slides is just really when you're looking at the policies and procedures that you have to have in order to meet the requirements for CMMC, doing something like downloading a policy or getting a pre-generated one isn't going to work. As Melissa said, they're going to take your policies and they're going to say, it says here that you do XYZ. Now show me. Log into the system. Show me it's patched. Show me that you got a notification for a patch and that it went through your entire process to the point where it landed on the system. And show me that you're doing it in the time frame that you have documented in your policy. And if you're doing something that you feel is above and beyond what's in your policy, that's great, but you're not following your policy and therefore you fail. It has to be one-to-one. So when SOCSoter designed the infrastructure to build security services, we really wanted to make sure that, we're a security company. We want to fly our own airplanes, as we used to say in the DIB, or eat your own dog food is probably a term that's probably more frequently said. So our infrastructure has been designed from the ground up to be a secure by design infrastructure. It doesn't mean that it's bulletproof. There's no such thing as bulletproof infrastructure. But that also means that we're constantly monitoring our infrastructure. We have a lot of our own tools as well as other companies' tools helping to monitor our infrastructure so that we can make sure that our infrastructure is as safe as possible so that way we can deliver a trustworthy service that our customers have confidence in. So all of our services are built in a FedRAMP moderate or high environment. It says AWS here, but we actually are a multi-cloud infrastructure. So we have our infrastructure primarily in AWS, but we also do leverage GCP, Google Cloud, and we also leverage Azure for different functions. But in all of those environments, we are hosted in either a FedRAMP high or FedRAMP moderate. Now, the infrastructure that we have in FedRAMP high is reserved for the customers that are doing business with the federal government in one way or another. So if you are working with us and you have a customer that's CMMC or is ITAR or needs to meet some DOJ or DOE requirement for cybersecurity, we can host that infrastructure for that customer in a FedRAMP high facility. That's something that we actually do not charge more for. It's just something that you need to let us know at the time that you're ordering services so that we can provision you in the right enclave. Currently, all of our infrastructure is at a minimum TLS 1.2 for all web interfaces. We do extensive backups on our entire infrastructure, and all of our backups are managed with encryption at the FIPS 140-2, and we also have some that are now leading into the new FIPS 140-3 standard. Typically, our services do not include any CUI, PII, PHI, or sensitive proprietary data, mostly because our services don't collect or peer into any documents. If there is data loss prevention type services that you're leveraging from us, such as deep packet inspection on our network-based SIM, we'll alert on certain things pertaining to that document, but we're not taking that document and we're not storing it anywhere. So anytime that we would have anything remotely similar or appearing to have that type of data is going to be inadvertent. But it doesn't matter. We are planning on the fact that we have that data and we need to protect it as a result, even though we don't, but we plan on it. Not that we're planning on it in the future, but we just sometimes you don't know, right? You don't know what's going to happen in a log. We don't know what's going to be presented on an interface for monitoring. So we're just assume the worst case scenario that we do have it and we protect accordingly. Because of that, we've made significant investments into our cryptography. So we have hardware security modules that generate cryptographic keys for us that are all FIPS 140-2. And it's not just utilized in our backups, it's also used across our entire environment, including our running infrastructure. We also, throughout this, you're going to see I've provided links to a lot of the certifications for the FIPS 140 or for the agency validation for FedRAMP. Next slide. So that's just a quick overview. So we also look at our entire infrastructure from cradle to grave. So whenever we're going to bring up something new, we have to do a security architecture and review design requirements overview. Where is it going to live? What is it going to look like? How is it going to be protected? What type of data is expected for this new infrastructure to be processing or storing? And we make sure that it is implemented in the right enclave with the right level of security by design, including what happens at the end of a life cycle, which is at data destruction. So, and I really just, why I wanted to bring this up was just because of the level of effort that we go through around designing our infrastructure. Even when we're doing data destruction and we look at all the keys and all the encryption that we're using, right? We have our hardware security module. It's strong, physical, logically secured. But everything that we do is isolated. So every single volume that we create is encrypted by default. And it's not encrypted with the same key. It's encrypted with a unique volume encryption. And then it's encrypted with region-specific secure master key on top of that. So what does that mean? That means that if you're hosted in a FedRAMP moderate, that's not the same as a FedRAMP high. And we have 6 different regions inside of FedRAMP moderate and 6 different regions inside of FedRAMP high, which means that we've got a lot of keys. We also do host in other regions, Canada, the EU, and so on and so forth, that do not share any of these keys whatsoever. And their security posture for this infrastructure is going to be very different. But I want to keep it specifically for US. Not only are the encryption keys used individually per volume on the hardware, it's never stored in plain text. And because each volume has a unique key, when we decide to destroy a server or destroy a volume or update or upgrade, that key is deleted from the volume. And even if we failed to destroy something, you still won't be able to recover any data because the key is deleted from the volume. So there's a lot of safeguards that we have in place. And if you look at our basic infrastructure, and again, this is really just a high level, there's a lot more security that we have than I'm depicting here, but I just wanted to give everybody a good understanding of the level of effort that we go through. And this is also something that we need to document, or we have documented, in order to go through this CMMC process. Number one, all access is by U.S. citizens. Our company is specifically Maryland-based, and our entire infrastructure is IP restricted. That means that specific parts of our environment is just not accessible at all to anywhere other than the IPs that are listed. And it's a very short list, I can tell you. We don't use VPN infrastructure either. We're very specific about who can access what parts of our infrastructure and when, and we deploy MFA everywhere. The level of authentication that we have to go through in order to get to some of our infrastructure can be daunting, but required. We do have public-facing infrastructure. That's how our customers and our authorized users will be able to access things like our centralized portal. And what I've depicted here is just a basic understanding of how that works. So you're an authorized user, you're coming over the internet. The first thing that you're met with is a role-based access and control system that requires MFA for full access to our customer environment, not our backend environment. There's no access to our backend environment ever. But that's just to get to our centralized portal, which obviously uses TLS 1.2. And then that centralized portal is completely isolated by multiple firewalls. You see two firewalls depicted here, and that centralized portal isn't necessarily one system. It's just depicted as one system here. It's multiple systems, but there's multiple firewalls surrounding it, and there's nothing else in there, right? It's a completely separate enclave there as well. And in order to get back to customer data or customer stores and volumes, we have secure proxies. And then from the secure proxy, we can start to access individual encrypted data stores. That's another unique thing that I think we do at SOCSoter for our customers is we do not commingle any of our customers' data. Customers' one data is on their own individual encrypted data store that has its own individual volume key for encryption, every single one of them. This is not a master database where everyone's data comes in and is all stored together and all encrypted together. We do not do that. So this is really just an understanding of basic data protection from an authorized user all the way through our centralized portal, then to be able to access the data that the customers want to see. Now, what's the data that they're able to see? Well, they're able to see metrics. They're able to see reports. They're able to see tickets, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then if they have MFA, they'll be able to see raw data. But with a certain level of trust comes a certain level of access. No MFA, no access. Next slide. We have different products that require different levels of security and different levels of authentication. So one of the products that we have is an on-prem SIM. And this is a device that sits on the customer's network, so that way we can do deep packet inspection, and the customers can also send log data to us. So that could be firewall data, switch data, wireless data, web server data, file sharing data, whatever they want. We made a decision very early on to keep that device on-prem. There's a lot of companies out there that do similar stuff to us, but what they're doing is they're not putting a specific hardware down on the customer site. They're taking all that data, all that raw data, and they're moving it up into a cloud infrastructure. We see that as a significant security risk. The customer should have their security boundary inside of their environment, and it should be as secure as it could be. We have our network device that we also secure to our standards that we put into the customer's environment, and we keep all that data local. The only thing that comes out of that device is anonymized and serialized alert data. There's no customer information. It's just a tickler that goes to our security operations center that says, hey, something may have just happened. You need to take a look at this. And then the Security Operations Center will go take a look at it. They'll adjudicate the alert and then escalate if need be. So we have three different ways that information comes from the customer environment. We have what we consider a TLS alert handoff system, a TLS meta handoff, and then we also have a TLS crypt v2 gateway tunnel. And they're used very differently, and they're also in different FedRAMP environments. So that way there isn't a single environment or a single mode of access. So the serialized anomalized alert, it gets sent to the SOC. If the SOC needs to investigate something, then they can go to the gateway tunnel and get more information in order to be able to robust the alert, do analysis, or do threat hunting on the actual SIM data. But then also the SIM itself will send regular metadata, which is really just metrics, metrics and numbers and reports and charts and stuff, which then would get sent up to the portal for our customers to review. The syslog and events that are collected are read-only. They cannot be modified. It's considered a system of record. Our alert system is also a read-only alert system, so we can't delete or modify. We can add. We can make changes to tickets, but we can't delete anything. So if we have a spelling mistake, we have a spelling mistake. If someone says something they're not supposed to, it's there forever. It sucks sometimes because we want to make a correction, but it's a system of record, and that's the way it needs to be. All of this activity, all these yellow lines that you see here are secured using HMAC SHA-256. That's important for us because it validates data integrity during transmission and encrypts it at a specific level that we feel comfortable with. And it also provides a verification on an originated trusted source of where that authentication information happens from. So we do have some requirements for our customers in making sure that they're not doing SSL peering or proxying, because that breaks that trust. And that's really important for us to make sure that that security is intact. So for our Security Operations Center, if they need to do an investigation, they're required to have MFA plus credentials. All of their access is IP restricted. They have to go through a secure proxy before they get to the gateway tunnel. And then, the magic happens from there. But you can see from the original infrastructure that I laid out, it's very, very different. This is a very, very different model inside of our SOCSoter protected boundary to the customer boundary versus where a customer or a user would access our portal for our data. All of these things, again, need to be documented, and just using this as an example, needs to be documented and outlined in our process and procedures for when we go through that CMMC audit. This is also very similar to how our vulnerability management system works. I didn't really need to make too many changes here to show you our vulnerability management, because our vulnerability management is also a component that sits on the customer's network and performs all of its vulnerability detections inside the customer's boundary. So there are some differences, but for the most part, vulnerability management shares a lot of that same security controls as the SIM and log collectors. Next slide. So endpoint, excuse me, endpoint's very different. So we have an endpoint product. Our authentication with our endpoint product, again, is FIPS 140-2. Everything is certificate-based and individually keyed per customer and implemented over TLS 1.2 or greater. It is all hosted in FedRAMP moderate environment for our US-based customers. The interesting thing here is, I know this looks like a very slimmed down version of what I had just previously shown you. It's actually the opposite. So the endpoint infrastructure is a little complicated based off of that intermediary services. If I was to blow out intermediary services, it would probably take me 2 pages to go through all of it with you, and it would bore you to tears. The most important thing here is that with endpoint, it's something that travels. It's something that moves. It could be a laptop. It could be a Chromebook. It's typically assets that are not necessarily pinned down to a stationary location, although we do support a lot of server infrastructure with our endpoint services. But the data protection model is very different because it's an endpoint, not a hosted server in a customer's environment. So in this case, it's any boundary. It could be the customer's office. It could be a Starbucks. It could be an airport, wherever it is. We need to make sure that we have a secure communication to our endpoint infrastructure. This is a serverless endpoint security solution. So there's no server and there's no infrastructure that our customers need to deploy. They just need to install software, endpoint agent. So we have very specific requirements for how that endpoint agent communicates with us, how our services are interacting with those endpoints, and then also depicted here, how the portal gets information from those endpoints. And by the way, those endpoints are ephemeral in the sense that they're not always on. So, servers, yes, server infrastructure, obviously you want to have always on, but computers go to sleep, laptop lids get closed, people turn them off for the night. So we have to have a very robust infrastructure to make sure that we're capturing all that information as best as we possibly can. Completely different type of enclave. So this one is also pretty interesting. It does have a lot of the same lineage that I showed you before with coming into our centralized portal. But here, what we have is, again, a separate infrastructure for FedRAMP High and FedRAMP Moderate, but we're then going out and leveraging different APIs from different SaaS applications and pulling events in to those FedRAMP High and FedRAMP Moderate infrastructures that we have in order to be able to evaluate those SaaS applications. So we do have a lot of situations where we have a CMMC customer. We're hosting them in a FedRAMP High. They're hosted in Azure GCC, probably either GCC or GCC High. And we're collecting all the information from FedRAMP High to FedRAMP High, which is great. But then they might have another service that's not a FedRAMP High. And that's okay, because from our perspective, we're taking that information and we're bringing it into a more secure environment. So from our perspective, we're doing our job. There are a lot of services out there that are offering FedRAMP High services. I know that Cisco has a lot of products. Their Duo platform has a federal version. And obviously your mileage will vary with the security stack that you choose, but we are interoperable with all of them. So regardless if you're in FedRAMP High with us, we can still communicate out to regular enterprise services. We can communicate to FedRAMP Moderate services. We can communicate with other FedRAMP High services. That's perfectly fine. Everything comes into us at the level that we're hosting you at. So if it's FedRAMP High, we're reaching out to enterprise, and then we're just bringing it into our FedRAMP High infrastructure. And again, all that data is individually encrypted data per customer. Next. And that's it for me. Hopefully that was informative and not too technical or too crazy.
Oh, that was great. That's always a wow. Thank you, Dave. So we're going to go into Don. Don's going to just talk about services really quick. Then we're going to have time for some questions. So.
Yep. So again, thank you, Dave and Melissa. It was a lot of information. It's a tough act to follow with you guys on the webinar. So just starting off a little bit, we are a 24/7 security operations center. We have highly trained human analysts that are sifting through all the data. We also have our own development and engineering team, which basically allows us to pivot quickly for our MSP needs and also for the industry standards, which you can see they're changing, currently right now. We're located in Western Maryland, about an hour outside of DC. We have everyone in our company is U.S. citizens. We're background checked, and our facility is built to the DoD specifics for a STIF. So as you can see on the bottom, that's a camera system, biometric entry system, complete concrete construction, sound dampening, et cetera, et cetera. Next. With a lot of the confusion out there in the marketing terms for endpoint and EDR, it's easily to get confused or misled. We call our solution a multi-signal MDR plus. It's managed detection and response. And the idea is we take a much more holistic approach to cybersecurity. Instead of just doing the endpoints, which many of the vendors that you'll see out there, we see it from a lot of different angles. And I think Dave just did a great job of explaining what those were. But endpoint, network, cloud, and even vulnerability management. This gives us just a much better picture of all the threats and the events that are happening on your system, and really allows our partners to maximize their investments. Next. All of that aggregates into our centralized portal, which Dave again spoke to a little bit. You can manage your tickets, integrations, escalations, and then build reports as well. We wanted to make this as easy as possible for you guys to gather all your information about all your customers. We have a lot of different features in there and a lot of different ways to organize your data, so it's easily accessible to you and your team. It also acts as a communication hub for the SOC. So one of the last things, so you're able to actually go back and forth with them and get the information that you need in a quick and easily accessible way. There you go. Next. One of those services that are in the portal is the compliance enablement. Melissa spoke about this a little bit in the beginning, but you need to stop checking boxes and actually start managing compliance. Next. And this right here is one of the streams that helps you do that. This is, as you can see here, we've incorporated a very light GRC tool. It's probably not exactly one of those, but on the right-hand side, you can see the different frameworks, specifically focused on CMMC for this webinar and this page. We allow you to upload documents from other services, store them here, and then you can see on the left-hand side that we have highlighted. It'll even allow you to calculate a SPRS score. Next. Yep. Here's another example of that, diving in a little bit deeper into that GRC kind of tool. You can see all the different controls for CMMC. It also gives you an ability, and for example, the awareness and training, you can see in there, we don't provide that, but we allow you to store the documents there, upload that and fulfill the satisfy the requirements. And then this is all in preparation for the audit that comes later. We want to make it, again, as easy as possible for you to store all the information in one location. Yep. And then going back to the compliance services that we have, Melissa being the director of compliance here, we offer a lot of different avenues to help you out with your customers, starting from guidance, assistance with the written documentation, the gap assessments, plan of action, and milestones. The assessments that we do too, CMMC obviously is the focus of the day, but we do assessments for many different frameworks. What we also do, I think this kind of separates us from a lot of the other people out there, is the coaching. Oftentimes we find that the end customer will kind of stop wherever we leave off and won't continue to fulfill the requirements that lead up to the audit. So we allow coaching. We provide coaching for you. It's monthly, and we'll go back and just kind of check the homework, keep people on task, and make sure the project is going in the correct direction. Audit preparedness, same idea. When you come down to that point, when you do have the audit, we're always available to help you out with that. We can even sit on the phone call with the auditors and help you go through the process to make it as seamless as possible. And then lastly, we say this all the time, and Melissa's been preaching this for 2 years, is the policy and documentation. Again, 25% technology, 75% documentation. Please allow us to help you out. It makes everything easier and really lets you guys use your time that you guys have in a lot more valuable way with your other customers or doing, the projects that you have. Pretty easy becoming a partner. We have links in here. Just reach out to me, my team, anyone here at SOCSoter. We'll be more than happy to go through our platform, learn more about your client or your own MSP. We'll give you access to the portal so you can go in and familiarize yourself with it. You'll be given a dedicated account manager, also a technical account manager. Both of those people will be able to help you strategize and really figure out the best way to support your client. We'll even have a marketing team that'll help you develop plans. And then the end goal is for everyone to be as successful as possible. A couple links and resources that we were talking about before that Melissa had referenced and David referenced. They're here, but we'll also be giving out these slides to everyone on the call as well. And there you go. There's the information.
Done. Yeah, contact us. I know we're at the top of the hour. Let's look to see about questions we have, if anybody has any questions. All right, and please, we'll be talking about this. So we do have a couple questions only to answer. So one of them is how do I interpret the controls? That's always a challenge. But what I want you all to know is that when you go through and you look at 800.171 alpha, make sure you use the alpha version. I need you guys to say whenever you see the word identify. So 3.1.1 alpha is, authorized users are identified. And most people's like, yeah, I know who my authorized users are. What that means is whenever you see the word identified, that means list out your authorized users, list out your authorized devices. So anytime identify equals list in your policies and procedures or in your inventory list or wherever, just list them all out. And authorized to also means that it has been, how do I want to say this? Authorized also means that somebody has to approve that user. So you got to show like, okay, authorized. So show me the ticket, show me the onboarding sheet, show me this, and show me somebody approved it. So make sure that, even though identify is a lot of layers into this. Whenever you see the word control, make sure that there is a process to follow, a controllable process, meaning by technology or by policy. So you have to control how people use your system. And the other word is whenever you see the word enforce. Enforce means a policy. So an example of a policy is an acceptable use policy or a computer use policy. You need to tell your users, this is how I want you to use the system. These are the only authorized functions that you need to do. And in that policy, and just say if employees are not following this, there is going to be disciplinary actions. So whenever you see, those are some key words that you'll see over and over in here. Make sure that you list all that out because 75% is documentation. Okay. Got a question about SPRS. It says, I have seen some scoring reports that show a 1, 2, or 3-point system. So that's a good question. So each control is weighted differently. So 3.1.1 is rated as a 5. So that means if you have, if you're not fulfilling A through F of 3.1.1, the A, B, C, D, E, and F subcontrols, you get 100. The perfect score is 110. If you're not fulfilling that, and that's a no, where you don't have that authorization, you don't have that list in 3.1.1a, that turns 3.1.1 a no, and you subtract 5 points. So all the controls are weighted a little bit differently. So they're either 1, 3, or 5. There are a couple controls that, hey, if you're not using FIPS encryption, but you're using AES 256 or some kind of cryptographic measures, you subtract 3. If you're 100% FIPS, then you automatically get a go at that. But if you're not using any type of encryption, it's -5. So those are, 1, 3.5, because the highest score you can get is 110. The lowest score you can get is, and I always forget this, but it's like -200. So when I calculate the SPRS score, if I say, hey, you got a 30 and I think that's really good, they're like, oh my God, I'm failing. It's like, no, you're doing really good. The average SPRS score for when I do a gap analysis for small business is -50. That tends to be average. And I feel a bit vindicated that that's what the DIBCAC has also said, that the average score is -50. All right, we got time for one more question.
I think
And
just to clarify, Melissa, that maybe the nuance there is that you get the points if you meet all the subcomponents, but you get no points if you miss just one. Is that right?
well, you start off by, yeah. So if you are 100% compliant, your SPRS score is 110.
No, I mean on a specific control. So a specific control, and I'm not going to give you a number because I don't know them. But
Okay,
if a specific control has A, B, C, D, and you have A, B, and C, but not D, right? Then you can't get the points for that
correct.
control at all. It has to be complete inside of that
All,
singular control.
all
Okay.
or nothing, right? Yeah. Yeah, so that's why it's really important to get all of them, because one little stupid thing can cause a big no for that. All right, so next question, good question. As an MSP, it sounds like you are saying we will need to be certified with CMMC. Yes. If you are using, if somebody, a machine shop that has, a contract with the DoD has that 7012 clause in there, and you are supporting them with, managing their infrastructure, and if you have security protective assets or data, log data, or log data, they said, and also,
Passwords.
well, no, not passwords. They don't say passwords, but configuration data. You need to be at level 2. If the tools that you're using, like SOCSoter, say, for example, you use SOCSoter, we have to show you that we are hosted in a FedRAMP moderate environment. So, which we are. I mean, Dave just talked about it. But that means all your other security tools, your RMM needs to be in a FedRAMP moderate environment if you use a cloud provider. I do know some RMMs are on-prem, and I do know some people who have been MSPs who've been successful at the DIBCAC assessments use the on-prem. I don't see cloud because I don't know if any RMMs that host in the cloud are in a FedRAMP moderate environment, but you're going to have to ask your vendors for that and get more information from them. Okay. So if we are providing Sentinel-1 EDR and the client needs to be CMMC, we need to be CMMC. If you are able to view and access that Sentinel-1 portal and you're managing it, then yes, Sentinel-1 needs to be in it, and so do you. So if you're offering that, and you're helping them do that, then yeah, you will be, because
But I
that
think that
security
depends
function
on
data.
the level of access, and that's why you're trying to work with the DIBCAC to get more details on that information, right? Because I think there's a lot of questions about how deep that rabbit hole goes,
Right.
and they have the responsibility to get that list, right? So, I don't know how much Sentinel-1 provides an MSP access to that endpoint. But if there's remote capabilities, if there's an opportunity to look at data that resides on that device, then I would say, yeah, it's game on. But the configuration data can be defined very broadly. So I think there's more to learn there, right?
Yeah, we definitely need more information from the DoD CIO on all this stuff, because we don't, like Dave said, we don't know how far down this rabbit hole we need to go. I would start asking your vendors what they are doing, because the more people complain to them or ask them what they're doing, it's going to nudge them in a direction. And then I don't know if they can offer solutions. I mean, we're not an expert in all solutions and everything like that. So you got to start asking the questions, and hopefully they can provide really good answers. And they're like, yeah, I got this. Yeah, I can help you out. Yeah, I can talk to you about this, that sort of thing. So start asking your vendors about what they're doing. I got one more question. I think we have time because I know we're a little bit older. How do I know what level of certification does my customer need, level 1 or level 2?
Yep.
That one is if there is no CUI data, like they're not providing you drawings, they're not providing you, they're just, all they're providing you is a proposal and say, hey, I need you to do this, or it is you're considered COTS, which is commercial, what is it? It's basically
Commercial off-the-shelf software.
yeah, that's right. Commercial off the shelf software, something that goes into vehicles. When I worked in GE Aviation, we talked about bearings. Bearings was considered COTS because they used them in automobiles, so it was going to be okay. So you have to see if you're COTS or if you just have the contract, and the contract is considered FCI, and that's going to be a level 1. If you get engineer drawings, really look at NARA and really take a look at that. And read it, because that will have a lot of information. And you can also contact us here. We can let you know what that looks like and what does that mean. As far as cost wise, like how much is this all going to cost? We know how much it's going to cost for an assessment, but we don't know how much work you're going to have to do on the back end to get to assessment. So my favorite word is we're not clairvoyant. We can't give you a price. We can only give you a price on SOCSoter solutions and what it looks like in your customer's environment. So, but anyway, that's all the time that we have. I really appreciate you all coming. I plan on doing this more frequently. We went through a DIBCAC assessment ourselves. We did very well. I kind of want to talk to you guys about what happened there, what they're looking for, what you have to approve, and some of the pitfalls that you're going to have. So I'm gonna start having this more frequently just to let you all know, because it looks like we're going down this road. Okay, the DoD is moving forward, and I want everybody to know about it, because it is such a brand new requirement, and I want everybody to be successful. And knowledge is power. I mean, I watch a lot of webinars, I read a lot of things, and just the sharing of information makes us all better.
Absolutely.
So appreciate your time. Thank you, and reach out to us if you have any questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.